So welcome everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and today's conversation for the 15 minutes picked up quite an audience. So I've asked the people in the room to tell me whether they're generally in the humanities or the STEM sciences. And at the time we start, it's about a 50-50. And that's good that I set up examples for both today. So our agenda is to look a little at the definitions, which are trying to be something for everyone and therefore may not be as helpful as you need them to be. Then I'm going to be talking about how you can divine a frame, either a conceptual or and theoretical frame, just by looking at someone's references. And it's a good skill. It's a good skill for you to think about, and then I'll tell you why it's a good skill if you haven't already figured it out by then. So it'll be a fast and furious 15 minutes. Definitions. We're going to start each of these conversations with conceptual frame, and you'll see why when I start to diagram them. A conceptual framework is an analytic tool with several variations and contexts, which is a polite way of saying that science has many definitions, sometimes definitions that compete or contrast with each other. It can be applied in different categories of work where an overall picture is needed. The overall picture is a key concept here. It is used to make conceptual distinctions and to organize ideas. Theoretical frame is the structure that can hold or support a theory of research study. The theoretical framework introduces and describes the theory that explains why the research problem under the study exists. Now, as I said, these definitions vary. You could pick them up from many locations. You will likely be, your research design will likely have given you a series of textbooks, and those textbooks will have their definitions of these things. It's been my experience that people actually writing don't think about the conceptual or theoretical framework very much until they're well into their review of literature, and then all of a sudden it may become something that needs to come up to the fore. So an after the fact, how do we put it together? How do we know what we're doing when we're halfway through doing it is really what I hope to answer. And if you're those in the room, you have a little hand in your chat box. If you would just push that hand, if you have been in the place or are in the place where you're being asked to have a conceptual or theoretical frame, and yet you're a good portion of the way through the work of your review of literature, at least. Okay, so divining the frame after the fact. I went to ProQuest and I found these two dissertations that are linked here. And I tried to choose one from each of your each of the two kind of big camps we have. So we have a humanities-ish camp. It includes professional research. It includes scientific research in health sciences, a lot of fields, but it has to do with people more. And then we have the STEMs that more likely have to do with physicality in some way. And Adrian is asking, is the conceptual framework more like a well-conceived and crafted patchwork? I'm not sure I love the word patchwork. Well, you can decide after we go through the rest of the conversation. So these two links take you to the pieces I'm about to discuss. I started with best practices because it's an educational study. I'm an educator, and I'm always looking for new lit on student success in higher education. So I picked it up because I thought it also might be good for my lit. I recommend that if you're being asked to, or if you think about even if you are just conceptualizing what these two things mean, that you think in terms of diagrams. Because to me, my understanding of how important they are and how they fall together and what good they are for the reader didn't really mesh until many years into my research when I started to design them in diagrams. So my personal research background says diagrams are really helpful here. So when I looked at that dissertation that you can download and see if you agree, the table of contents actually gave me pretty much the fact that there were three major bodies of lit: student success, strategies for student success, and transition strategies. And that the document itself was drilling those down into the center of the policies and programs, especially for first generational students whose nobody in their family had done that level of education before, and what people were doing that aimed to make them more successful. So the Lit Review looked like 4 bodies of research. But in fact, if we talk about the conceptual frame, we see that the point she or he is trying to make is that those outside bigger bodies of literature have their own overlaps, and they come together in the center for her topic or his topic. I think it might be her, which is first gen students. Okay, so that's the conceptual frame. Now, what does it rest on? What's the foundation? And that's where theoretical frames come in. If you were to read through her references, as I did, so I had seen in her literature review that she had these 3 headings. So I was looking to see whether, as I read through her references, I could put those things that I was reading into those frames, into those 4, ended up being 4 topic areas. And I could. And then there was social capital, quite a few things about social capital. And I realized right then that that was her theoretical frame. So all of these ideas in her or his work rest on top of social capital theory, which basically says that we grow up in different ways and we have different amounts of privilege and resources given to us because of a fluke of birth and circumstance, but those things play into everything else about our lives, especially if you're a first gen student. And if you continue to look at her references, you saw some pieces about phenomenology. So social capital theory is glued, if you would, to make the foundation with her methodology, which is phenomenology, taking you out into the field to really get down and dirty, if you will, with what is going on there to try to figure out the complexities of what you are studying. So the conceptual frame are the big things, that ideas that sit on top, drilling into a common center that is the topic, and they all sit nicely. So this would have been, if this author had chosen to, he could have described this as the conceptual and theoretical frame and even given their reader a picture. Why might that have been important? In this case, it wasn't so necessary because it wasn't a very complex set of ideas. You could capture it pretty easily, but some of you are dealing with very complex set of ideas. And if you can give your reader a way to see it as well as read it, they will have an easier time of it. So then I went to a LiDAR study, specifically looking for LiDAR, because one of the people who comes a lot is doing LiDAR, and I'm learning more about it. And so this particular study was on oceanography, and it fell together pretty easily in terms of the conceptual frame. It was clearly a whole section on the history and specifics of LiDAR, another section on forward modeling. So kind of here's how the tools we're using work. Here's how we're going to specifically use those tools. And then we're going to drill down into oceanographic research that used LiDAR and give our reader an understanding of what has gone before, which then takes us to the center, which is the methods and materials used in this study. It was a bit more difficult, and that's why I asked all of you to sign in as to whether or not you're in the STEM side of the planet or the more humanistic side, because in the sciences, theoretical frames are not as, they're there. I looked up theoretical frames for LiDAR. There is certainly material there, but it isn't as required in research study to raise it up to the consciousness of your reader. This person, however, when I read through their reference list, it was clear that in their thinking, they went back to Einstein's heuristic light emission work. So that was the foundational piece. And then, interestingly enough, just like once I had that component, once I saw that that was the framework, then I understood that multi-wavelength LiDAR was married to that earlier work, and that was the kind of LiDAR that was being used in this study. That's just to say that your fields, there is a need for you to understand how the pieces of all those thoughts you have had for so many years go together in a tight way, because you're being asked to become experts in your field, and that's what makes the difference between an expert and not. An expert knows the foundational parts of what they do so well, they can say it in a few words. And if you can diagram it, you can say it in a few words. But some of you may not be required to have all the parts. It's still useful for you to know them or to think about this, all these components and how they go together. I also want to say that not everything diagrams into a Venn diagram. But I think if you go to the relationships part of what Word uses in for their relationships diagrams, most of your ideas, I find them useful to have a bunch of ideas that I'm not sure how they all go together, to go to those diagrams and see which diagram I could actually use to describe what I'm thinking and then have it go together. This is a diagram from a student that we're working with on a university, and she's an educator, and we had the conversation about conceptual frames, and she came back to say, what about this one? And so my only comment was I thought the arrows should be arrows on both sides, because if you're using things like arrows, then they need to show relationship. And she's saying that the central part of great education has 4 different components, so a Venn diagram wouldn't work. But actually, those components impact the center, and the center impacts those components. So she agreed, and with a double-headed arrow, that would be, and she may or may not need it. You may, once you do this work, it may not be needed for publication, but it will help your words get more clear. So how does it improve your work? And let's look again at the definitions. A conceptual framework is an analytic tool. So that's the important part to me. This is the idea of doing this, is to propel all of us as scientists into being able to describe the relationships between the literature we read and the work that we do, and to make distinctions that help organize our ideas for our readers. Because it's, at the end of the day, if we don't have readers, we're just individuals, in some ivory tower somewhere. And that is not really where science should be today, in my opinion. So it helps us understand the concepts behind the literature better. I had never, when I was recently developing some of my own work, I had never thought about the large clusters that my work had evolved to incorporate in quite the same way. So it helps our understanding, it helps our readers' understanding, and it helps us analyze whether and to what extent our research questions actually relate to the literature as well as we think they do. Because those of us designing research, we're on a pathway, and it's useful to us to have points where we have to stop and look back and make sure that all of our ducks are in a row, everything's lined up. And one of the things that needs to line up here, as you saw in those earlier diagrams, is there a theoretical frame that this is built on? And does that all add to and supplement my methodological choices? Do my questions actually ask things that point to what my conceptual diagram says they should point to? And then the same thing holds true for theoretical. It's the structure that can hold or support all your ideas. That's a big task. Many of us, especially any of you who are in interdisciplinary work, you have a lot of ideas that the structure may need to hold. And you may not have one theory that does that. So we're seeing, if you're in that kind of a challenge, then paradigmatic theoretical ideologies might interest you, something for you to look up. So you might have multiple ideas. I mention it here. And it's a good test for your literature because if it is meant to be the complete understanding, is there literature that you're using that's actually from a different base? And had you thought about that? And I'll just kind of give you a heads up about, this is one I have seen come across my desk. The theoretical base was one of the criticals, critical race, critical, there's a number of theories, but I think this was probably critical race theory. But not all the literature came from that component. So that's just something to notice. It's not either right or wrong, but if you're going to use literature, and if it in fact is significant to your study, and its theoretical base comes from a different place, it should be considered. And if you have committee people who really know your field, it might even come up as a question. And from there, it tests your questions again. Okay, so that was a pretty quick, almost made it in 15 minutes. And just to say, www.wooclap.com/15 minutes is where you can go and write questions, and I will answer them in the order they came in. We have 2 already. I'll show them on your screen in just a minute, but before I do, I just want to point out upcoming things. Tomorrow is Dr. Maria is doing something on poster presentations, really useful. Tuesday nights, US Central Time and Pacific Time. One of the things that we try to do is repurpose pre-recorded things that are known to be excellent in different time zones, and this one's on critical analysis. We all can be better, no matter where you are in this field, we all can get better at critical analysis. And APA is up, and then I'm back next Monday talking about graduate school metacognition. So, and kind of watch that space. That topic may change. I had something brought across my desk today that made me say, maybe that's more important, but we'll see. Always here on 15 minutes, and I hope if you are signed up to one of these, you will get the invitation next Sunday for whatever's going on Monday. Okay, and the big news, of course, is boot camp. If you are pre-proposal and you have 10 weeks this summer to do some to be helped along in a really supportive environment, we invite you. And if you have or are about to collect your data, we invite you to the post data bootcamp, which is 8 weeks. Both of them have a week off in the middle. So if you're interested in more information or those, you write to Siobhan at PD Education, and I'll just leave that screen on for a second in case any of you are taking down that email, or it's in the handouts because the slides are in the handouts. That's even better. So let me real fast change the screen, and let's see if I can. This one looks right. Okay. There we go. It's www.wooclap.com/15 minutes. Oh, before I forget, I was also asking in the polls, if you would give me, I'm very interested in the fact that 300 people thought theoretical and conceptual frames were something, and that might mean that we want to do more about this. So would you, I'm trying to get the polls open. Let me see, is there a queue here? Yes, so there's 2 new questions. One is whether or not how you would rate this. And the other was, if you would rate it in a 1 or a 2, would you give me some hint about what else, your particular circumstance, and how else? And you can also put that up in a question, of course, and we'll talk about it right now. Okay, so thank you for that. First question, I worry too much about things and it impacts my ability to focus on my research. Do you have any suggestions? You know, I recently came through a period of time when I had huge anxiety about a specific thing in my life. And I found that I probably don't give enough, when I get questions like this, I probably don't say enough that I really get it, how completely it can take over your brain cells. And when you have huge anxiety or almost, I would almost say PTSD, some of us have circumstances that ring from the past that basically our emotional body tries to shut down because of fear or whatever. So if it's a long range thing and it just keeps going on forever, then clearly outside help is useful. And there are a number of things. If it's more about something specific, like mine was something that'll pass in a month or so, then I think some specific helps can be, actually there's some recent research I came across with the dancing, putting on some whatever kind of music makes you happy and just dancing until your body loosens up, because part of anxiety is that our solar plexus just really turns off and becomes hard, and that exacerbates our brain going on and on. So that's why the parasympathetic nervous system counts. That's why meditation works and breathing works, and all of those things are useful tools. But dancing was really useful to me in a recent episode, so I lay it out on the table as well. You want something, you're looking for a tool, I was looking for a tool anyway, that could change my being enough to get my head focused back on my work again. And it was kind of like a stall, stop, stall, go, stall kind of process until something came along that I focused on easily because I really liked it, and then it got better. But didn't go away easily, kept coming back, was miserable, is miserable. So best of luck to you. I'm so scared of doing my comp, writing 3 papers based on my dissertation research. I feel like I do not know all the constructs I am reaching yet. Do you have any idea how to use conceptual frameworks to prepare for that? What a good question. Okay, so I would say a place to start is your reference list. And see if you can read through your references and you can begin to categorize them in those big circles. Or relationships. You might go to like some relationships are as somewhere between here and here. My work is measuring where something is between these two locations and then what underlies all of that structure. So thinking about it in a structural way is useful. You also might pull out the concepts from, since it's for comp, that were from the syllabi of the courses you took. So your thought pattern and the structure that your program has in place for you also has big Venn diagram kind of structures to it. So you might play around with all the possible circles and then which ones actually fall together in which ways. And if you're writing 3 papers, you might be pulling from those structures differently in those 3 papers. And that's okay because you're not having to do comp before you really get into the proposal is a situation that everybody who reads it will understand. You're in process, and that'll go forward. So I hope that's helpful. My dissertation is about international doctoral student socialization. Can I make a conceptual framework that align what? Yes, absolutely. It would look, just to go back to the slides for a second. So your research is on international doctoral student socialization. How can you make a conceptual frame that aligns? Well, so it might be like this. So your socialization literature would be one circle. What we know from the existing lit about, you might have doctoral student completion being one. That's a separate, I see it as a separate body of lit. Socialization theory being almost a theoretical underpinning for a whole lot of literature on PhD completion. So you might verbalize it in different ways. But, and then you're drilling, whatever you choose for your 3, you're drilling into doctoral student socialization in the middle. And then you also can test whether or not socialization theory fits on top of your methodology well. So that's, I think actually that's pretty easily doable. But again, if you look at your references and the things you're pulling from when you get your ideas, you may see that what those 3 circles are. Is the following analogy on point then? Conceptual frames are the optical lens that serve different purposes. Correcting short-sightedness or long-sightedness. Yes, this is better. The conceptual theoretical framework would be the physics of light and color. Yes, the corresponding theoretical framework would be the physics of light and color. Yes. I think that's quite good. And that's what you're looking for, is you're looking for relationships that people can say, oh yeah, that fits my worldview, and it makes sense here, and it gives me a stepping stone I can then read into your detail. Because your lit review will have lots and lots and lots of detail. I believe that it's really useful for your reader to be able to get a grasp on where they are going in a big, broad-based way that they can agree with, and then they will read your literature with less of a what is he or she doing here, but more of a trying to understand point of view. I think I zoomed. I have a similar issue here. Can you please share some tips on how to deal with a difficult person and one I have to work with on a daily basis? I have help with difficult people. Let me bring up the site and see if I can get it for you quickly. So there is Professora Maria and I, the last time, she's updating our work on the 10 skills needed as we move, most needed as we move forward from the World Economic Forum. But one of those skills had to do with negotiation. And I did that webinar and I worked through every possible, my literature took me into every possible kind of irritating person and with ideas about how you might work with them. So you have a twofold process here. One is, how do you manage yourself so you can stay your highest and best self? Because we can get so triggered by things, depending on our pasts, that that we lose, and that's no good. And then also, how do you negotiate? So let me just type in negotiate without, I don't know if it was Ting or E, and see if I get my webinar. Skills for negotiation, right there. I can even give you the link. I like our new site. I like how.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Alana James.
Not so sure I love the fact that the videos start right away. Okay, so back to chat, and the person who wrote this, there's your link. But the daily basis, we've had people recommend certain apps. Calm is one of them. I'm investigating Headspace. Some kind of application that gives you a minute of coaching to breathe and calm down, and nice music and whatever will do a lot to help you transition back into being who you are when you are triggered. My book chapter got accepted, but the editor wants me to reorganize many sections of my paper. What is the best way to reorganize it? Can I assume from this that the editor made specific suggestions about the reorganization should go here, here, and here, and you're wondering how to do it physically in Microsoft Word, which looks like big cut and pastes. And if you pick up heading all the way through, and then you move them into a document on its own, so it's there and it's stable, then you can go up to where you're putting it and cut and paste it back into there. And you shouldn't have too many formatting runaround challenges to cope with. If the reorganization is more on a paragraphy section kind of level rather than a heading to heading level, you actually are also changing the flow of the document and the logic of the document. So you might think about, is that section that they're asking me to move really a heading to itself or a subheading, and I should put it in? It's really, these are the kind of thoughts that throw me into headings and subheadings and organizational patterns to help people flow through something so that it logically transitions. And the best way to cut and paste large areas is into something else so you don't lose them and back, from my experience. Do we need to have, and if you have more questions about that, keep asking. Do we need to have more, both conceptual framework and theoretical framework in every research? No, you don't. That's the reason this is challenging, is that a lot of what we do in science is an art form, and our fields have developed their own specificity and what they consider the norm separate from each other. So as we move into a world, and I just attended the European University Association conference, And it's really clear to me from the speakers that we are moving into an interdisciplinary level of science, that it is required now that no matter what our field, we will be required to work in interdisciplinary teams, probably. So our fields will change and morph, and some of those edges will break down. And universities are considering how they need to change in order to accommodate students who have to be launched into a world where that is true when their silos are still pretty tight. That's one of the tensions right now in higher education. So that's the background to say conceptual and theoretical frames are not required everywhere. I always recommend that you get 5 models of your work, of the work that you can use for your own pathway into what you are doing, and that one of those models was signed off by your supervisor, and if not by your supervisor, at least comes from your program at your university. And then you go to that model when you have a question like, do I really need a conceptual and a theoretical frame? Did that person have one? You respect their writing. Somehow their writing is somehow similar to yours. And for anyone who's not familiar with that, we recommend 5 models. Basically, your methodology, no matter what the topic, basically your topic area generally talks about something similar to you talk about. One from your program, one that is an award winner, and one that is just really well written that you came across when you were looking for all the others. If you have that wide range and you are shooting, and this is the same for if you're doing a 3-chapter dissertation, then you do it those same kind of headings, but for 3-chapter dissertations, so that you can see the range in the work. And then you can guide your ship into the range at least before you start to show it to somebody else. That will give you more confidence and will be helpful. Okay, so I really appreciate all of you who contributed a question. They are helpful not just to you, but also to everybody else who comes in. And it looks like that's our questions for today. So unless someone is typing, if someone's typing right now and wants me to answer another question, please put your hand up in the chat box in this room. And if I don't see hands going up in just a moment, I will thank you all very much for your interest in this work. And please, if you didn't do the poll, please do so I can see kind of what your reactions to what we did today are. And I look forward to seeing you again at some event sometime soon, and wish you only the very best in your graduate work. Looks like we don't have any more recordings coming in, so the very best to all of you today. Bye.